Hello everyone. In this video I am going to do some character 2D animation with grease pencil and Blender. I want to start this video off by saying that I'm not a trained animator and I'm not an animator professionally at all. I've done some 3D animation, but just as for sample animations for me to build a character and just to pose the character and stuff like that. But I'm definitely not a trained animator, let alone a 2D animator. But I'm so inspired by the grease pencil and the stuff I'm seeing that I just can't help but mess around with it. So for this daily sketch I decided to do some animation. So the idea was basically to have a character jump from these big steps in a loop. So I'm messing around a little bit with how to set up the stroke snapping, and it took a while to really get that working well, but basically I'm snapping it to a plane, and the plane has zero opacity, so that way I'm kind of painting in perspective, but on a canvas essentially. So I'm really hoping that they find a solution to this kind of setup because it's a little bit cumbersome. So I'm decided I want to keep this kind of again like within the hour. It ended up being quite a bit longer than an hour because I was learning a lot and figuring stuff out. I think in the end it was an hour and 40 minutes or something like that. So I just want to keep it loose, and all I know is I want to have this character jump from each step, so it's really just one jump motion and then a landing. So I'm just trying to figure out what's kind of the best way to block this out with the tools that we have. So I start by basically just using the original drawing and then moving stuff around with selection and rotation and stuff like that. That's working pretty okay, but pretty quickly I decide that I'll just be faster and I'll be better off if I just kind of draw every pose almost from scratch. And because the character is really kind of simple, like I gave him a ponytail to have something distinctive, and I think it'll look also pretty cool as like secondary motion when he's animated. So because there's not a lot going on in the character, so to draw him in every frame is not such a big deal. And I'm using the onion skinning feature as well, which I found really useful. Again, I'm not sure how common that kind of stuff is because I don't normally do 2D animation. So I'm just kind of figuring out the timing and the poses, and just to make it feel good. I don't know if there's any real rules. I'm sure there's like some animation rules that help figure that stuff out, but I'm just going by gut feeling mostly. And it's interesting because it allows me to redraw the same character in different poses, even though it's just very blocked out and just a basic sketch. But it is very good for me just to train my my ability to sketch stuff out and to get this kind of these dynamic poses on the character. So I thought it would be cool to have, when the character lands, to have him kind of get swallowed by the next step, like a portal or something like that, and then he just crawls out of it, and that's kind of the loop. So that's now he's falling down, and then the next frame he'll hit the floor essentially. And I think for me it's a little bit of a cheat as well, because getting like a landing to look right, to look good, like again, I have no experience doing that stuff, so I was just kind of picking my battles, and I thought it would look a little bit more interesting as well that way. So I did run into a bunch of issues with the grease pencil. I had a crash at some point when I wanted to copy and paste the keyframe. And then the other thing that I'm not sure if I have quite figured that out yet, but you know, if you move to a new point in your timeline and you just start drawing, I noticed that it basically deletes the previous what you have there as a sketch. So it deletes all the strokes and then draws from scratch. I wonder if that's a bug or if it's intentional. I kind of like it because it basically, grease pencil is saying, okay, you're going to redraw all this stuff, I'm just going to clear what you have already so you can redraw from scratch. Maybe that's also a feature I need to disable or enable it somewhere. But if you go into a new frame and you start selecting or sculpting, then it'll use what you have, basically. And you have to be careful with that, with the when you're using fill. So later on in the video, I also, when I'm done with the line work, I then do like a fill for every frame of animation as well. And there I ran into some issues where when I went to a new frame, I would select all of the vertices of the fill and delete it so that I could redraw the fill. But what I didn't realize was that when you do that as your first action, you're also deleting the previous frame fill. So luckily it wasn't that bad, but I had to like redo some stuff, and that's why this video definitely took a little bit longer than an hour. So you see here he's like falling into getting absorbed, and then now he has to kind of crawl out of it, and you know, that's, for me, that's pretty difficult to figure out. So I'm not really using reference, and to be honest, I think I'd be much better off to use reference, whether it's like video footage or just reference of poses. But I know that if I start scrolling to reference, I'm also gonna just like spend a lot of time getting lost into, you know, looking at reference, and sometimes I think it's better to, if you're comfortable with it, to just not use reference for the reason I just mentioned, but also just because a lot of the times when you use reference, whether it's for animation or just modeling and sculpting, it'll give you ideas that you didn't originally have, which is good, right? But sometimes it'll also distract you from your original idea, and that could be for the better and it could be for the worse. So I think it's like a mix of the two, where sometimes it's good to just say like, look, I'm not gonna look at any reference, I'm just gonna do what's in my head, you know, and then afterwards you can still look at reference. I don't think you should do that just for the sake of then saying, oh, look what I did and I didn't even use reference, like to boast or something. I think that's stupid. But just to train yourself, you know, to kind of build your visual library, and I think in that regard, I think it can be useful, and maybe just to be fast as well, because like what I'm doing now, you know, it's not, I didn't take it all the way down to like a refined 2D animation. And I think probably like with modeling or sculpting, the last 10% of refining something is kind of the longest and sometimes most difficult part. And so I didn't do that part. So, you know, like I kind of feel like I skipped the more tedious and difficult part. But that's just kind of for time's sake as well, and I guess because I'm a bit lazy. But then, you know, like if this was a storyboard, I think, or just a block out of an idea of an animation, this is great for that, and I think I'll probably will use it for that kind of stuff, just to get my little ideas blocked out, or if I, you know, kind of as an extension of a character design, doing little animations like that, I think is pretty cool. And I enjoy it a lot as well. Like I really had a great time messing around with animation, you know, even if I'm not an animator and if that's not the thing that I'm gonna be doing, you know, anytime you can kind of look at another part of your industry, you know, as a character modeler, looking at character animation and messing around with that, it does give you a better idea of what other people in your industry, you know, have to work with and what their work is like, and it gives you an appreciation for the other crafts, and it will also, I believe it also like it has a benefit to your craft, because then when you are you know, when I'm going back to sculpting something, all of the experience that I've gained by, you know, animating something, that benefits the sculpting as well, directly or indirectly. And it's hard to really explain that. Maybe someone else can explain that better, but it is experience, you know. And a lot of experience, you know, it spills over and it's relevant. Then doesn't go for anything. Like if I, you know, learn how to bake cupcakes, it doesn't necessarily help me make characters, but animating characters will certainly help you design and model characters to some extent. So I think now I have kind of everything blocked out, and now I'm just gonna go in and, you know, do some in between frames, and that's where the onion skinning feature really is very useful. So the onion skinning is like it shows you the frame in front and the frame behind, where the frame that you are basically. There is also an option that allows you to do automatic in-betweening. So it basically looks at the two frames and then it'll interpolate and basically smooth out what's in between. But from what I noticed, you can only do that if you're reusing the strokes, which in a lot of cases you can do and would do, but in the way that I animated this stuff, it's very rare that I reuse the same stroke over different frames. And in general, the end result of the animation is a little bit still very blocky, like it's low frame rate, and that's also, you know, just because I don't want to do that last 10% of polish. And then if I would do like some of the animation have that interpolation and some of it not, it would look kind of awkward, I think. So this is kind of cool, because what I can do now is I can really just go in between the frames and then use the Sculpt tool to just, instead of redrawing or instead of selecting, I can just sculpt the pose basically, or sculpt the in-between by pushing and pulling stuff, and that's really fantastic. Like the combination of, you know, drawing frames and then having the ability to select and move strokes, and then on top of that the ability to sculpt strokes, like push and pull them, like that is such a game changer. And I'm not sure if you have that in any other 2D animation software. I assume that there would be something like it, you know, some kind of proportional editing tool, but yeah, I have no idea. All I know is that I never thought about it like that when I thought about 2D animation. Like I never thought that 2D animators would have a tool like that, and just now experiencing having that tool, the ability to sculpt, is just fantastic. Like it's really fun. It makes the whole process really fun. So I'm having some issues here where the whole animation is based on the time that the amount of frames that I used to animate the camera, because I wanted the camera to loop basically. So I gave myself, I think, 55 frames, and I kind of shot myself in the foot a little bit, because what happens is that the last couple frames of the whole animation, where he crawls out of the hole and stands up, that should be kind of a slow thing, right? Like he should be slow, because it's a lot of effort and he's working against gravity, so he has to push himself up and then, you know, stand up. And, you know, I just don't have enough frames in the end, so I end up having to like move around frames quite a bit to give that last bit of animation enough time. And in the end, I think it's still too snappy, in the end. So, you know, but that's a lesson learned for the future. So what I wanted to do here was basically to get, on average, a frame drawn every other frame. So I wasn't concerned about having every single frame something. I just wanted to have every other frame roughly, you know, something. Tweaking the camera after the fact, and because it's a perspective camera, and because I'm also using like 3D objects in the scene, you know, you do have to be careful, because the object or the 2D drawing is kind of laying in front of the 3D object in this case. And, you know, in hindsight, I think it might have been better if I had set the canvas kind of in between the object. So then I would have been able to really mess around with the camera a lot more. So now I'm just adding some little effects. Didn't really know what I was doing here. I just saw some animators do this kind of stuff to the animators, so I just messed around with it. And I think there's an art to this as well, like just drawing effects. And it's really fun. Like I really had, I don't think I nailed it in the end. Like I think it was a bit awkward. But I can see how, you know, how it adds to the animation quite a bit. It's like little detail like that really helps sell stuff, and it's also small effort, you know, like it doesn't require a lot of work, and you can really go by feeling, you know, how it feels. So now I'm doing like just adding kind of speed lines, also something I've seen in other 2D animation, and I don't know if it's called speed lines, but I just wanna, it's kind of this blend where because those frames, they go very fast, so you never really see the lines. I mean, you kind of see them, but they just help sell kind of like motion blur kind of thing. So I'm also stretching out the character a little bit, and you know, when he's falling down or jumping up. And there's definitely some, you know, some science to that, you know, some animation theory behind the whole stretch and squash, and I'm a little bit familiar with it, but obviously not that much. So obviously the video is also sped up, so when you see the animation being played, you know, it's playing a little bit too fast, obviously. But at the last minute of the video, you'll see, you know, the animation at regular speed, so it won't be sped up. And I think maybe I'll upload the full-length video to Gumroad or Dropbox or something if you're interested in watching it at normal speed. So now I'm going to go through the process of filling, and I'm not sure exactly what the best method is here, but I decided to just very, you know, go brute force, just drawing a full kind of silhouette around each frame, and then just sculpting it in place. If you use the smooth tool as well, you can really get the lines a lot smoother, and then if you push and pull with the Sculpt tool as well, that it ends up going pretty fast. In the beginning I'm struggling a little bit, but near like the middle of this process, I'm doing it pretty fast. And in the beginning I also try to reuse the fill quite a bit, and then just, you know, the next frame I'm gonna basically just sculpt the fill into the new position, and that works quite well for when the pose changes a little bit. But near the end I just realized I'm faster if I just redrawing the fill, so I'll start doing that. The reason I'm doing the fill also like in one piece is because I wanted to use a gradient on it later on. And if you have like multiple pieces of fill, like for example I'm going to fill the head and then I'm going to fill the lower body and now this part and that part, then the whole gradient system, you know, it screws up because it'll individually gradient each one of them. I think at least last time that's what it was doing. Maybe they fixed that, but then I didn't use gradient in the end anyway, because the gradient end is a global thing, or it uses global space instead of local space, which I really hope they fix that, because you know that means that yeah, you cannot use one material for an animation where a character goes very high up and very low down, because then the gradient will just stay in place and just looks really bad that way. So I think they should set the gradient to be you know, used locally. I don't know how that would work, but at the moment the gradient on animated objects, I don't think it works very well. And the whole fill tool in general, I think, is probably the part of this whole process, and crease pencil that I think in many ways is the weakest. You know, it's you often get a lot of artifacts with the fill tool, and it's just cumbersome a lot of the times. Even though you have like the fill, like you can do automatic fill and stuff like that, it doesn't really work that well. And I think this is the part that may require most work, I think. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to improve that whole process. See, now I'm just moving pretty quickly, filling each frame. I'm not sure if there's a better way of doing this, because you know I'm only dealing with 55 frames animation, and then out of those 55 I think I only have something like 40 that are actually have something drawn on them. But I can imagine if you have like you know, several minutes of animation, it's not ideal, especially like I'm just filling it in one solid color. But then if I wanted to do like have the head as a separate material, and you know, the arms, the hair, you know, all that stuff, then it would be very cumbersome, I think. So here's where I kind of screw up a little bit, because in the next frame I'm gonna move to the next frame, and then I'm gonna select and delete what I have. And that essentially means that you're deleting the previous frame, because it doesn't create a frame when you select and delete. It only creates a frame when you draw something new, or when you move something, you know, like you use the Sculpt Tool, or you select and then move something a little bit. So I'm basically just drawing and deleting right after, so I'm redoing that now quickly. In the end, this was really great experience, and I think I'll definitely mess around with animation, 2D animation a lot more now with grease pencil. This is also interesting. I just thought about this, just using the Sculpt Tool to drag the fill outside of the line work, to kind of have like a bit of a smear effect, and I think it works quite well. And it's super easy to do, like that's super quick. So now I'm just trying to figure out like whether or not the gradient works, but as you can see, it doesn't, right? So again, I didn't really spend a lot of time on it, so maybe I'm just missing some some features, or missing some options. And now I'm just using the effects rim to add like just a rim light. I really like this a lot. Like it adds a lot to the look, and it's very fast to do this, you know. kind of saves you from having to add another fill layer and, you know, kind of. So I wanted to see if I maybe add a shadow as well, a cast shadow, but I decided against it just to save some time. And now I'm just figuring out kind of the color and stuff like that, like how to colorize everything. In the end, it didn't really, like, I didn't end up with a contrast that worked good enough color wise, but yeah, like I said, I mean, it was kind of the first time I'm messing around with animation here, and I really enjoyed it. I hope this video was useful to all of you. If you have any suggestions, or if you saw anything that I did here that you think, you know, I might want to do differently next time, feel free to just make a suggestion or leave a comment. Bye.